Alright guys, so this video is intended to show you how to clean up the bottoms of your thrown pieces and give them a foot ring. So before we begin, it's very important that your pot is in the leather hard stage. So this has been drying for a day. I can touch it, tap it, it holds its shape, but it's not completely dry. I do need it to be still soft enough to carve through easily. If it's bone dry, you're going to have a tough time getting your piece to stick to the wheel head. You're going to have a tough time trimming. So if it dries too much, you'll either have to rehydrate it or just start over. So first thing is getting your piece re-centered back on the wheel upside down. So you'll notice these throwing rings on the wheel head. That is to help you get them re-centered. So my first attempt is going to be just trying to get these centered on the rings. If you're lucky, your pot will line perfectly up with them, but mine does not fit the size, so I'm just going to try. And that was actually a really good first attempt. I'm going to gauge whether or not it's centered by holding my finger very near the pot. If it hits in some places and not others, that means it's off center. Mine is, but it is so minor, I might just go with this. But a little bit off center, I can take a needle tool and holding it still, create that ring. So this is very exaggerated, but what I know now is that this really wide part means it is too far this way. This narrow part means I need to move it over more, so I can start to gauge where it needs to move to become more centered. I can try to do that again, making sure to keep track of which circle I'm focusing on. So still, this area here is narrow, this is wider, so I need to move it more towards that narrow section. Try one more time. And we're pretty good. Pretty close to center. If you want it to be perfectly centered, I have something called a Giffen grip. Ask me about it. I only have one, so it has to be on an as-needed basis. All right, we're all set. This is as good as I think I'm going to get. So before we begin trimming, I need to take some fresh clay, and I'm going to create 3 clay lugs. And this is what's going to hold the pot in place while I trim. So holding it firmly in place with my hand, I'm going to take this lug, get it right up to the lip of the pot, and just press down. I need to make sure it is pressed against the pot as well as the wheel head so that it does stick. I'm going to try to spread these out so they're evenly dispersed 3 ways. I'm just going to double check it stayed center, and we're good to go. Now, when I first started trimming, the first thing I was ever taught to do is to get this base level. Because oftentimes after we wire it off, we end up taking a chunk off at some point. So if I were to run this along, if I were to run my fingers along, I'd feel bumps. This is pretty even, so I don't have a lot to do, but what you would ideally start by doing is, so first notice my hand and body positioning. I am very close, hunched over and centered, just like I am with throwing. I'm using both hands to keep this trimming tool centered. So I'm going to start by gently pressing this down into the middle. And once I feel like not a lot of clay is getting scooped up anymore, I'm going to start working my way to the outside. And I'll notice that with each rotation, certain areas have clay that lifts up and creates these dirt noodles. That tells me that the clay foot was slightly uneven. So by working my way to the center, I'm getting this nice and even so that it lays flush on a table. Not that it will matter much after I carve my foot. Alright, it's becoming more obvious to me as I get to the edge. Alright, and we're close. Now let's say it's really, really uneven and you're having trouble because the tool just keeps going up and down with each bump. It's not going to help if you are trimming everything with a bump, because when you take down the top layer, you're also taking down the lower layer. So what I have are these rasps, or shredders. Unfortunately, I don't know where the handles are when I inherited this room, so we're gonna have to do this kind of unconventionally, but I promise I have handles coming in for next school year. So I'm gonna bend this a little bit with my hands so that I'm focusing the shaving power just in the center. I don't wanna have too much surface area getting caught because I don't want this to fly out of my hand. But if you're having trouble, or if you just want to skip that first step altogether, then you can just gently hold this against your pot, and it does a much better job at getting that bottom even. If you can see, I'm going to move my hand so you can see. As I hold it even, it's only with every now and then in the rotation that the noodles come out. Alright, so I'm going to just do this again without trying to show for the camera. Start in the middle, do the same thing, work my way to the edge. And I have a very even bottom. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2 now is you can start to clean up the edge, you can start to reshape the body, and you can start to create your foot. So first thing I want to do some reshaping. So I'm going to take my smaller tool, I should do this with the flat edge, my smaller tool, and I'm going to start trimming a little bit of this extra foot inward. Now, I checked out my pot from the inside before I put it down so I know how thick it is. So I can take a good amount of clay off of these walls to help reshape and make this a little bit more elegant and a little thinner. So I'm going right down as far as I can without hitting those clay lugs and getting those walls a bit thinner by trimming. You do have to be aware of the amount of clay in your pot because if you take too much away, you'll just end up carving a hole straight into the bottom. So I'm going to try to have a goal of making this way rounder. I want to bring this whole flat part in a lot more. So it's probably going to take some trial and error. What I'll do now that I've cleaned that up a bit, I'm going to try to make my foot ring. So with a needle tool, I'm going to decide where I want the foot ring to be. I'm going to have to create the inner ring and the outer ring. So now my job is to leave this loop that I've created alone and carve this away and carve this away. This is meant to be slow and steady. If you press too hard with your carving tool or with your loop tool, you're going to end up potentially gouging into the clay too deep, which will cause the pot to fly off the wheel. So do a little bit at a time. Don't try to do the whole thing at once. Alright, I've gone pretty deep. If I want to check to make sure I'm not about to carve through the bottom, I'll do a little poke test. This isn't really giving or moving, so I know I can go a little deeper. If that started to move or cave under the pressure of my finger, I know I'm getting pretty close to the maximum thinness before I'm going to poke through. Okay. Do this a little bit more. Test again. Alright, I can see it moving. I'm going to stop. I don't want to poke through the bottom. So now what I'll do is I'll start to go in from the outside and bring down all of this clay. All of this is going to be gone. This is why sometimes it's okay to leave extra clay at the bottom, but be wary because too much clay will cause uneven drying and cracking in your piece. Alright, I think I'm going to stop. I just want to double check that we're even from the inside. Oh yeah. Any thinner, I would have lost this piece. So, if you're not sure, take it off, do a check before we lose it. If I had kept going, this would have broken. Alright, so I went from a clunky bottom pot to this nice, elegant, thin pot with a foot ring.